The lonely mountain man hit a wounded pregnant Comanche woman in his ranch. Months later, the winds rolled across the lonely ridges of the Sangre de Cristo Mountains, hissing through the pine needles like whispers from an older world. The land was still untamed in those years, vast valleys and shadowed canyons where wolves prowled and rivers still cut new paths through the stone. Most settlers feared this land, calling it cursed or sacred depending on whom you asked. But one man had carved out a life on its slopes. His name was Elias Croft. He was a tall, gaunt man in his late 30s with a beard that had grown thick and dark from seasons of solitude. His cabin, built by his own hands, sat on the shoulder of a high ridge, overlooking a stretch of forest that seemed endless. The locals in the nearest town called him the Mountain Ghost because he seldom came down except for salt, ammunition, and flour. Elias didn't mind. He hadn't been seeking company since the war ended. He had fought in the Union ranks during the bloodiest campaigns of the Civil War, and though his body had survived, pieces of his soul had not. The solitude was his refuge, his penance, and his curse. One evening, near the end of autumn when the aspen leaves burned gold and the nights carried a bite of early frost, Elias heard something unusual. At first, it was only the faintest echo, a cry, not an animal, but a human. He froze, his rifle in hand, his ears straining against the sighing wind. Again it came, weaker this time, drifting through the dark trees like a ghost. Cautiously, Elias descended the ridge with his lantern, his boots crunching the frost-hardened ground. He found her near the tree by the creek. A woman collapsed, her body half covered in blood and mud. Her dress was torn, her dark braids tangled with leaves. She was clearly Comanche. Her facial tattoos and silver adornments revealed that much. She clutched her swollen belly with one arm, the other arm hanging limp and broken. Elias knelt beside her. He had seen enough dying men to know she was on the edge of life. Her breath rattled, her eyes fluttered open, and she whispered something in Comanche tongue he could not understand. But the plea was clear. For a long moment Elias stood frozen, the weight of old grudges pressing on him. He had fought alongside men who cursed the tribes as savages. He had seen raids in Texas, heard tales of vengeance and slaughter. Some part of him told him to walk away. But then he looked at her belly, round and trembling with life inside, and something inside him shifted. He remembered the child he had lost with his wife years ago, before the war, before everything fell apart. That memory broke his hesitation. Elias scooped her into his arms and carried her back up the ridge. For days he tended her. He set her broken arm in splints, stitched her wound with the careful hand of a man who had patched soldiers in battlefield tents. He boiled herbs he had learned from old trappers, pressing them to her fevered skin. Her strength returned slowly, her breath no longer shallow gasps. The woman watched him warily at first, her dark eyes like flint, always following him. She spoke little, and when she did, Elias only caught fragments. Eventually, though, she whispered her name. "Naya," she said. The name was soft as the wind through the pines. Elias nodded, repeating it gently. "Naya." She seemed surprised he made the effort to pronounce it properly, and from then on, she allowed him closer. Through winter's bite, they survived together in the cabin. Naya grew stronger, though the child within her pressed heavily, making her slow. Elias built extra fires, hunted deer in the low valleys, and even risked riding into town for medicines, telling no one why. There were nights when the silence between them was heavy, broken only by the crackling fire. Elias wanted to ask who had wounded her, why she had been alone, whether her people were searching for her, but he respected the fortress of her silence. In time, though, she began to share. In halting English, she told him she had been fleeing from men, white men, who had attacked her people's camp. She had been struck down but escaped into the forest. She never said whether her husband still lived. She never said if her child would be born into a world of orphans. Elias listened. Sometimes he answered with stories of his own. His wife Mary, taken by fever, the son she had carried who had never drawn breath. Naya's eyes softened when he spoke, as though she understood grief was its own language. Months passed. The snow melted. Spring rivers roared with fury, carrying branches and boulders in their torrents. Wildflowers burst along the meadows. Naya's belly grew vast, and with it, Elias's fear. He had delivered wounded men, yes, but never a child. The thought of her screaming in agony in his cabin haunted him. And then the day came. It was a stormy afternoon, the sky a roiling gray. Naya's labor came sudden and fierce, waves of pain doubling her over. Elias prepared as best he could, boiling water, tearing strips of cloth, his hands shaking worse than they ever had in battle. The hours dragged into eternity. Naya's cries filled the cabin, raw and unrestrained, her hands crushing his as though trying to transfer the pain. Elias whispered to her, steadying her, begging silently to any god that would listen. At last, the wail of a newborn split the storm. A baby girl, small but strong, red-faced and furious at the world. Elias held her for a moment, all flooding him, before passing her into Naya's trembling arms. Naya wept, pressing her cheek to the infant's head. Between sobs, she whispered something in Comanche, words Elias did not understand but felt deep in his bones. He sat back, exhausted, staring at the firelight dancing across the wooden beams. For the first time in years, he felt something crack open inside him. Something like hope, but the peace did not last. Weeks later, riders came. Elias spotted them from the ridge. 5 men on horseback, rifles slung across their saddles. Their faces were hard, their eyes hungry. He knew the type, mercenaries, hunters of men and women alike. He quickly hid Naya and the child in the cellar beneath the cabin floorboards, covering the entrance with a rug. Then he stepped outside, rifle in hand, as the riders approached. The leader, a grizzled man with a scar down his cheek, eyed Elias's cabin with suspicion. "We're looking for a runaway," the man drawled. "Comanche woman. Pregnant. Heard she passed this way." Elias's heart hammered. His face remained cold stone. "Ain't seen anyone." The man spat tobacco into the dirt. "Funny. Tracks lead up here." The standoff stretched, the air thick with danger. Elias's finger brushed the trigger of his rifle. He knew 5 against 1 was suicide, but he also knew he'd die before handing Naya over. Before the situation exploded, a cry pierced the silence. The baby's cry. The men stiffened, eyes narrowing toward the cabin. Elias felt his blood turn to ice. "It's a child," he said quickly, forcing a laugh. "Neighbor left me to watch it." But suspicion already burned in their eyes. They pushed past him, storming into the cabin. Elias followed, fury boiling. The men overturned furniture, ripped through cabinets. One of them found the rug covering the cellar. With a sneer, he yanked it back. In that instant, Elias moved. His rifle cracked, dropping the first man where he stood. Chaos erupted, gunfire, shouts, smoke. Elias fought like a man possessed, fueled by something greater than himself. He took another down before a bullet tore across his side, sending fire through his ribs. But Naya erupted from the cellar like a storm unleashed. With a hunting knife in hand, she drove it into the nearest mercenary's throat. She moved with the ferocity of a mother protecting her young. When the smoke cleared, 3 men lay dead. The other 2 fled into the forest, their screams echoing. Elias collapsed against the wall, blood soaking his shirt. Naya knelt beside him, pressing her hands to his wound, tears streaking her face. The baby wailed between them, alive, demanding the world acknowledge her. The weeks that followed blurred into a haze of recovery. Naya nursed both Elias and her child back to health, her strength astounding him. She had lost everything, yet she had not surrendered. Elias felt humbled, even unworthy, of the bond growing between them. The baby, whom Naya named Ayoka, meaning she brought happiness, filled the cabin with life. Her cries, her laughter, her tiny fists waving at the ceiling, turned the lonely cabin into something Elias had not known for years, a home. Elias would sit by the fire at night, watching Naya cradle her daughter, and feel something he thought long dead stirring inside him. Not just hope, but belonging. Months later, when the snow threatened to fall again, Naya stood with Elias on the ridge. She looked out at the endless forest, her daughter bundled against her chest. "You're home," she said softly, her English now stronger. "But now our home." Elias turned to her, the mountain wind in his beard, and for the first time since his wife's death, he smiled. A real smile. The war, the blood, the grief, all of it had led him here. To this ridge, to this woman, to this child. The lonely mountain man was lonely no longer. And as the snows began to fall once more, Elias Croft knew the mountains had given him a second chance. A family. And this time, he would not fail them.